Have you ever felt trapped in a life you built yourself, brick by brick, only to realize the walls were closing in? For Daniel, that silence, the kind that echoes in your soul, became louder than any scream. It was the only thing he had left, a vast emptiness that swallowed everything else. Daniel was a corporate manager in his mid-40s, the kind of success story people envied from afar. He had a sleek house in the suburbs, a luxury car in the garage, and a daily routine that ticked like clockwork. But beneath the polished surface, he'd lost everything that truly mattered, starting with his wife, Elena, in a tragic car accident 2 years ago. The crash had shattered his world, but he hadn't let himself shatter with it. Instead, he poured himself into work, climbing the ladder one rung at a time, as if promotions could fill the void. People thought he snapped suddenly, vanishing without a trace. But the truth was, he'd been fading for years, slowly walking away from his dreams of becoming a writer, from the raw grief he buried under endless spreadsheets and conference calls. He used to stay up late, crafting stories that made Elena's eyes light up. Now, those notebooks gathered dust in a drawer, forgotten like old promises. Picture a younger Daniel, in his 20s, full of fire and ambition, scribbling furiously in a worn notebook at a cozy cafe. Elena sat across from him, her smile warm as sunlight. "One day, I'll publish this," he promised her, his voice brimming with certainty. She believed in him, encouraged him through rejections and late nights. But then came the job offers, the steady paychecks, the responsibilities. Promotions rolled in, and the dreams died quietly, suffocated by the weight of practicality. Elena would tease him gently, but over time, even those conversations faded. It all culminated on an ordinary Tuesday, in the middle of yet another meaningless boardroom meeting. Surrounded by charts and projections, he felt it, a breath he couldn't catch, a tightness in his chest like the air had been sucked from the room. What if he never wrote that book? What if this hollow existence, days blending into nights of solitude, was all there was left for him? The question hit like a wave, drowning out the droning voices around him. He stood in his office doorway that afternoon, staring at the life he'd so meticulously built. The awards on the wall, the ergonomic chair, the view of the city skyline, none of it held him anymore. There was no explosive anger, no dramatic revelation. Just an overwhelming numbness. No note left on his desk. No goodbye email. No bags packed. Just a quiet exit, closing the door behind him with a soft click that echoed in his mind. He walked out, not running from the past in a panic, but deliberately escaping the numbness that had become his prison. As his feet hit the pavement, memories flooded in unbidden. Elena's infectious laugh echoing in their kitchen, the crumpled accident report he'd stared at for hours in disbelief, the endless nights alone with a bottle of whiskey, staring at the ceiling, too numb to cry. The phone rang late one rainy evening, the hospital call that changed everything. "She didn't make it," the voice on the other end said, cold and clinical. The world tilted. Elena had been driving home from work when a drunk driver crossed lanes. He pushed the pain down deep, locked it away, and threw himself into work harder than ever. Colleagues praised his resilience, but grief doesn't disappear, it waits, festering in the shadows, ready to erupt when you least expect it. People often assume someone leaves because of a catastrophe, a betrayal, a loss, a breakdown. But sometimes, people leave because nothing happens anymore. For Daniel, it was the nothing after everything. No joy in the mornings, no purpose in the achievements, no spark in the days that stretched endlessly ahead. The life he led had become a quiet room with no air left to breathe. But what if walking away meant finally facing it all? The grief, the regrets, the man he'd become. He didn't have a destination in mind, but his steps led him out of the city, toward the forest he hadn't visited since childhood. It was a place untouched by the relentless hum of corporate noise, where ancient trees stood sentinel, and the ground was soft with fallen leaves. He hoped the solitude would bring peace, but instead, the quiet amplified his regrets, turning them into a cacophony in his head. In the woods, his mind screamed accusations. You abandoned her memory by hiding in your job. You betrayed your dreams for a paycheck that meant nothing. The words swirled like leaves in the wind. He paused under a canopy of branches, whispering an apology to the trees, to the empty air, for Elena, for his old friends he'd pushed away, for everyone he'd let down in his quest to keep going. Deeper into the forest, he stumbled upon an old cabin, rotting wood, broken windows, vines creeping up the walls like forgotten secrets. It was abandoned, forgotten by time, much like he felt. Stepping inside, the musty air and creaking floorboards felt strangely welcoming. Raw and real, with no expectations, no deadlines, no facade to maintain. For the first time in years, he felt like he could just be. On a dusty shelf, amid cobwebs and forgotten relics, he found a notebook, its pages blank and yellowed, staring back at him like the empty canvas of the life he'd wasted. He scavenged a stub of pencil, lit a flickering candle from matches in his pocket, and sat at the rickety table. The flame danced, casting long shadows that mirrored the turmoil inside him. I forgot to live, he wrote first, the words simple yet slicing through him like a knife. Then more poured out, details of the accident that haunted his dreams, the ignored dreams of writing that Elena had championed, the self-imposed isolation that had turned him into a ghost in his own life. The truth burned as he wrote, each sentence a spark igniting long-suppressed pain, but it was a start, a painful, necessary catharsis. In the months after the accident, a close friend had visited, handing him a fresh notebook. Write about her, Daniel. Let it out. Heal through your words. But he'd shaken his head, turning back to his computer screen. I can't. Work is what keeps me sane. He chose the numbing safety of routine over the vulnerability of creation. Now, alone in the cabin, he faced the true cost of that choice, the years lost, the potential squandered. As the night deepened, he wrote an unsent letter, addressed to the fragments of his old life, to Elena's memory, to his colleagues, to himself. I'm sorry I lived next to you, not with you, he penned, the words blurring through tears. I existed in the same space but never truly shared it. The admission hurt, a raw ache in his chest, but truth always burns before it heals. Tears came then, hot and unrelenting, not from weakness, but from a profound release. In the dim candlelight, he sobbed for the life unlived, for the love lost, for the man he could have been. What if forgiveness was possible, not just for others, but for himself? Hours turned into a restless night, the cold seeping through the cracks, but for the first time, it didn't scare him. The silence inside matched the silence around, no longer oppressive but contemplative. Morning light pierced the trees gradually, filtering through the canopy like a quiet promise of renewal. The forest awoke with birdsong and rustling leaves, and Daniel stepped outside, feeling the sun's warmth on his skin, a sensation he hadn't truly noticed in years. He wasn't a new man overnight. Transformations don't work that way. He was simply honest now, no more running from the grief, the failures, the authentic self he'd buried under layers of pretense. He left the cabin behind, walking forward with deliberate steps, not toward a mapped destination, but toward something real. Toward finally writing that book in Elena's honor? Toward a simpler life, perhaps in a small town, reconnecting with old passions? The path was open, winding through the trees and beyond, full of uncertainty but also possibility. On a gentle hill overlooking the forest's edge, he paused, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply, really breath, filling his lungs without the weight of pain pressing down. He forgave himself there, quietly and completely, for the mistakes, the avoidance, the lost time. It was the hardest part, that self-absolution, but it lifted a burden he'd carried far too long. Daniel didn't return to his old world, the corporate grind, the empty house, the superficial successes. He built something new from the ashes, a modest cabin of his own, perhaps, where he wrote stories that poured from his soul, connections with people who saw him, not his title, a life imperfect and messy, but undeniably his. Because the bravest act isn't enduring in silence. It's walking away from everything that suffocates you, so you can finally walk toward yourself, toward healing, toward the light you thought was gone forever. What would you walk toward if given the chance? Write this in the comments and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next videos that can literally change your life.